So this is the weekly live stream on the state of the Russo-Ukrainian war. It's certainly been a very dramatic week. I didn't have a live stream last week, so I didn't comment here in live format on the debacle, the diplomatic debacle in the Oval Office. But since then, we've seen the United States cut off military aid to Ukraine, cut off intelligence sharing, and even it appears prevent third-party companies like satellite company Mazar from sharing images with Ukraine. That's certainly going to have an effect on the Ukrainian military, how much we'll have to see going forward. And big development in the last few days has been a Russian counteroffensive in the smaller part of Russia that is currently occupied by Ukraine in the Kursk Oblast around Sudzha. The Russians have successfully taken some territory and split the Ukrainian controlled territory in two. It does border with Ukraine, so we'll have to see what effect that has on logistics and whether Russia can actually liberate all that territory. That would be a significant blow to Ukraine in the sense that they would lose that bargaining chip with Russia, and that has become more important as we see the US President Donald Trump push Ukraine to basically, in my analysis, to more or less capitulate to Russia. That seems to be his policy. He has already, before negotiations have even begun about a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, insisted that Ukraine will not join NATO, there will be no security guarantees. He's basically blamed Ukraine for starting the war. Amongst other things, said that the current Russian attacks on the energy infrastructure, along with other things, the increase in drone and rocket attacks in the last week or so, is something that anyone would do, apparently. So that coincides with a lot more of an expansionist point of view from Washington under the Trump administration. He has already openly discussed taking control of Greenland, annexing Canada, taking back control of the Panama Canal. And this rhetoric, at least in the sense of the goals, seems to match a lot more with Russia's point of view as a revanchist imperialist state than with the international rules-based order that the US helped create post-World War II, where national sovereignty is sacrosanct. And you could argue that, okay, Trump wants to peacefully bring Greenland and Canada into the US by making it so attractive, but he has not ruled out military intervention, which is quite interesting for a guy who campaigned on stopping wars. But I digress slightly about the US. In Ukraine itself, there is a steely determination to continue in spite of the US's actions against the interests of Ukraine, and basically a desire for an end state where Ukraine gives up its territory that is currently occupied and agrees presumably to the vast majority of Russia's demand, very similar to potentially the deal that Ukraine rejected back in early 2022 after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, or the extended invasion 2022 by Russia of Ukraine with the Istanbul Accords. They too are not seen as a good solution to Ukraine's long-term security if Russia can just learn from its mistakes, rebuild its army, and especially if Russia gets a soft landing with respect to sanctions being lifted, then this would just be kicking the can down the road and Ukraine would be in a very weak position, with the US effectively abandoning its ally Ukraine at this point. They have not cut off Starlink, at least, and it is possible that military aid will recommence going forward. It is now up to Ukraine's European allies to fill in as much of the gap as possible. In terms of materiel, Ukraine produces about 30 to 40% itself. 30 to 40% comes from the US, which is now going to be cut off, it looks like, and 30 to 40% the remainder comes from primarily Ukraine's European allies, and we have seen major movements by, say, Poland and other countries in terms of increasing their national defense spending and preparing possibly for confrontation with Russia going forward. So European allies of Ukraine are taking a lot more seriously. in light of the US's withdrawal and possibly even switching sides. Not that I think we're at the point that the US would actually start helping Russia actively. At the moment, they're helping Russia by withdrawing support. So that is the crazy situation we see ourselves in. Not completely unexpected. It is broadly in line with what Donald Trump actually campaigned on. Just seemed that most people didn't see it as a high priority amongst the US electorate, or just didn't believe would actually go ahead and do this. We're kind of at the high water point mark where I thought Trump would go in terms of withdrawing support from Ukraine. I think Starlink is the only other thing that really I had perhaps anticipated might be cut off. That is, of course, owned by Elon Musk, who has not at the very beginning of the 2022 offensive, but at a certain point thereafter has, in terms of his circulation of tweets or retweeting, clearly favored the Kremlin's narrative with respect to this war, the Russo-Ukrainian war over Ukraine. So Starlink may be cut off in the future. At that point, is there really anything that Ukraine needs to be concerned about in terms of the US withdrawing even more support? Maybe US would then unilaterally lift sanctions, and that of course would help the Russian economy and the war effort to keep going. Russia faces three major problems this year: manpower, money, and materiel. Manpower, they are running out of voluntary soldiers to join. They did a partial mobilization back in August, was maybe October actually, 2022. That was very unpopular. A huge number of Russians left, apparently over 1 million. Many of those may have returned in the meantime, but it's far more, it's far bigger in effect than just the, say, 300,000 primarily men who would have been mobilized to join the war effort. It also involves a lot of people leaving the country. So that is an additional cost to the Russian economy, and very problematic in terms of their society and continued acquiescence with the war, maybe not enthusiastic support. So that is manpower, money. The Russian economy is really struggling. That's why lifting sanctions will be a huge priority for them. No matter what people, pro-Russian commentators say about sanctions aren't working, well, Russia wouldn't be so determined to see them lifted if they weren't having a significant effect. And we can foresee a huge issue in the Russian economy, especially in the second half of 2025. Maybe it will even take until 2026, but war is expensive, and even if Russia doesn't have a high jet to GDP ratio, they don't have that much more runway in terms of kicking the can down the road again in terms of the cost of this war. And the material, they've been primarily refurbishing Soviet-era stocks and using all that up. However, in the second half of 2025, Russia, if it continues with high intensity, will start to run out of a lot of that material that can be repurposed, refurbished, and they then will struggle to continue the war at such a high pace. It's been pretty glacier in terms of their progress on the battlefield. They took, I think it was around 0.7% of Ukraine's territory in 2024, in spite of being on the offensive for most of it. Ukraine took a small part of Russia in the Kursk Oblast that Russia is now trying to liberate from Ukraine. So without Donald Trump pulling the support, they would not really have much of a pathway to victory. It can, at this point, most likely be achieved at the negotiation table if the US is going to strong arm Ukraine into accepting bad terms that would undermine its long-term security. However, especially under Vladimir Zelensky, I don't see Ukraine capitulating. The Ukrainians are due to meet with US officials in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia this week. They may negotiate the minerals deal, or rare earths, as Donald Trump keeps referring to it as, having reviewed the document also on this channel. This is the one that was not signed in light of the diplomatic spat that took place in the Oval Office just over 9 days ago. Is actually a reconstruction agreement to agree. It's actually an agreement to agree a reconstruction fund agreement going forward, using new Ukrainian mineral resources that would have to be extracted, and using 50%, that would then be 50% controlled by the US and Ukraine, and the money would have to be spent on Ukraine's redevelopment. Presumably American firms would get a lot of that business. But overall was a pretty innocuous document. It is not a rare earths deals. It is actually not clear how many resources Ukraine actually has that can be extracted profitably. So it is a bit unusual to see so much furor around such an agreement. However, it was alleged that the Trump administration basically demanded a huge amount of Ukraine's resources and profitable industries in return for continuing the support of Ukraine militarily and financially, and this was not considered acceptable. It was likened to a neo-colonial diktat. So we will see if there is some sort of new agreement that will be signed between the US and Ukraine after their undiplomatic argument in the Oval Office. Zelensky did send a tweet and a letter to Trump saying that they're willing to sign the deal, and yeah, but I mean, a deal. I'm sure they're willing to sign both parties, but which deal is the big question. We will find out this week. And in general, let me know, write some comments to this channel and ask me your questions, of course. I am, Privet, my name is Connor Klein. I'm an expert in international relations, academic background in the field, and I have been living in Ukraine for many years, speak both Ukrainian and Russian, and worked as a lawyer at the EU institutions in the past. I'm best known for my lifestyle channel, and I'm here to give you a more insightful and unique perspective on the happenings of the Russo-Ukrainian war. So write your questions and your comments down below. This Q&A format, I'm going to try and do it every week at this time for now, and give you the opportunity to interact with me a little bit more. The channel has gotten a good bit of traction this week when my videos did quite well, and that has actually more or less doubled the number of subscribers. And you know, first goal as any YouTuber starting a new channel is, especially one that deals with political commentary like this, is to get up to that critical mass of getting the channel monetized. That would be 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours of watch time. So that is the first target, but ultimately I would like to see this at least, you know, my videos be getting 30,000 views sometime this year. So let's see how that goes. Josh asks, bro, Trump and Putin are basically best friends. Do I agree? I'm not sure best friends is a term, but it seems like Donald Trump, he has a lot of empathy for Vladimir Putin. At this point, he seems to see Ukraine as an obstacle. He keeps making references to that and keeps talking about how the Russia hoax and how Putin went through that with him. So they seem to have this shared common experience that he's referring to. So whether we see them as friends or not, certainly it is unusual. And it appears that Donald Trump is conducting the presidency not with a focus on national interests, but more on his own personal interests. And you can interpret that in two ways. The personal interest, that he actually interests him, which is to talk about, you know, Zelensky not helping with an investigation into the previous administration, the Bidens, basically Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. And it seems to be a lot of personal animus from Donald Trump towards Zelensky, and he seems to associate himself and the personalities with the actual countries, not be able to distinguish between, say, the personal interest and relationship with Vladimir Putin and Vladimir Zelensky and the U.S. national interest. And since the end of World War II, U.S. national interest has been in this rule-based international order, which limits countries' ability, big countries' ability to basically invade their neighbors and take territory formally, at least. Of course, you can wield influence in other ways informally. So that is what has been torn up. We are arguably now in a multipolar world. I wouldn't have said that 2 months ago. And it is not because China and Russia have risen relatively so much to make it a multipolar world. It is because the US decided to take a step back and ally with one of its rivals, geopolitical rivals, that is Russia. And they seem to be more aligned with Russia than with the US's NATO allies, whether it happens to be Canada or the European allies, and whether they're in NATO or outside, like Ukraine is. And that has upended US foreign policy and global security, because if the case is now that countries are not going to have to respect national boundaries and sovereignty, well, there are so many wars that can start because leaders are going to think, well, if Russia can get away with it and even get supported by the US in the end, then they can launch such war. So we're at quite a dangerous juncture in history. But Donald Trump will, according to U.S. Constitution, not be president for more than the next 4 years, and we have midterm elections, and we have the U.S. Supreme Court potentially influencing his foreign policy, as we've seen with the recent Supreme Court judgment with respect to USAID, and we'll see how that clips his wings in terms of pursuing this different approach to US's relations with its rivals and with its erstwhile allies like Ukraine. So back to a bit more about the channel. Make sure you subscribe and let me know your questions like Joshua did, and I will answer them here in this format. Also, if you're watching this on replay, I will do so. And yeah, it's pretty exciting. I'm going to try to have a video per day. I think the boost I got, at least in the algorithm this week, and now the new videos that I do get, I noticed, I took a bit of a break from making content for this new channel just around New Year's for about, it was almost 2 months, well, maybe 6 weeks. And since I got back, the views have now maybe doubled. This new channel, of course, and now since the last few days, they've doubled on new videos again, leaving aside the one that got a little bit of virality or disproportionate number of views. So my subscriber base has doubled, and yeah, looking forward to making a lot more valuable content. I will be going back to Ukraine itself. I'm currently outside the country, and I will be giving you a perspective from there on the ground in Ukraine, which was the original idea of me creating this second channel, taking away from my lifestyle channel, because the lifestyle channel deals a lot about socializing and picking the best country for you to live in, especially if you're a guy who has high income streams somewhere in this region. And obviously there are not so many people who want to move to Ukraine at the moment, and a lot of the content that I put on that lifestyle channel about the Russo-Ukrainian war, it kind of mixes two audience. So that's why I've created this dedicated channel. The idea was to be able to do the live streams from Odessa Mama, but I will be back pretty soon, it seems, in Ukraine, and I will be doing that. So a lot of good on the ground commentary coming to show the perspective from Ukraine itself. Not too many of the political commentators I see have even visited Ukraine during the war. Some of them who are big on the pro-Ukrainian side, and if they do go, they go occasionally. And yeah, I would prefer to actually be back and be based in Ukraine, as I have been for most of the last 5 years. So let me know your comments and questions. Feel free to write them. Also, if you're watching this on replay. And yeah, videos coming this week. I will, of course, comment on anything particularly mad that Donald Trump decides to say. And if it is pertinent and any other developments, we'll see what comes out of this meeting between Ukrainian and American officials in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia later this week. And yeah, whether the Russians are actually really successful in the Kursk Oblast, that would be a negotiating blow, and for the Ukrainians, it would weaken their position further. Just to comment a little bit on Volodymyr Zelensky, we have seen this week a rally around the leader effect following the verbal attacks by J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. His approval rating has jumped more than 10 points, and if there were actually to be elections, not that that is at the moment legal in Ukraine because of martial law or even practical because of the situation, but fine, they could try to organize an election. Unless Zaluzhny, the former commander of the Ukrainian Armed Forces and current Ukrainian ambassador to London, runs, then Zelensky will win in a landslide. Zaluzhny is considered the most popular alternative. He is, it would seem, at least on his public statements, less open to any sort of compromise with Russia, whether it's at the behest of the United States or someone else, than Zelensky. So I doubt that Russia and US really want to force an election to see him elected. That would be the most likely outcome if he were to run. He is not currently calling for election or saying that he would run, but he would be in a strong position. He's probably the only person, realistically, who would win an election against Zelensky. So I will wrap it up there, my thoughts on this Sunday afternoon. And keep your comments coming. Keep your, I guess if you want to Is there anything else? Yeah, if you want to donate, because I don't have this channel monetized, my PayPal is down below. Any donations are, of course, welcome, giving me a little bit of extra motivation to make these videos. It was a bit tough before Christmas because they weren't getting much traction, so I wasn't sure about the value of making such regular content. But now that we've had such political developments with respect to the US under the Trump administration, it seems like things are more and more pertinent with respect to making this kind of content. So yeah, there's no other way to, I guess, support me. There's also my guide if you happen to go to Ukraine or to Moldova, neighboring Moldova. A lot of guys are going there. I actually have a draft guide for going to Warsaw in Poland. Obviously, with Ukraine, normal caveat applies. Russo-Ukrainian war, biggest war in Europe since World War II. So you have to obviously be cognizant of your own safety. Got a lot of advice with respect to that in the guide. Also, logistics for traveling to Ukraine and my hospitality guide for places to go, like cafes, restaurants, etc. Cocktail bars, maybe, because yes, there are those, in spite of what Donald Trump tries to say all the time, saying that everything is destroyed. Well, there are lots of new businesses in Ukraine, so I have those for Kyiv, Odessa, Lviv, Chernovtsi, and Uzhhorod. Zakarpatske Oblast and Uzhhorod are the only part of Ukraine where there is no curfew. The rest of the country, there's a curfew from midnight until 5 a.m., so there isn't much clubbing or anything like that going on. Not that that should be your priority if you are going to Ukraine. And if you can go, I would encourage you to document it and put your money in the local economy. You can play your role to help Ukraine in its time of need. Even better, obviously, if you're helping with the humanitarian effort or with the military effort in the country's national defense. So yeah, those guides and also one for neighboring Moldova are down below in the description to this live stream. The Moldova one, obviously Moldova is not a war, so at least at the moment, you don't have to be so concerned about your security. Maybe just have an evacuation plan in mind, just in case. Probability is going to be low while you're there. However, I do have an amazing hospitality guide for cafes, bars, clubs, shisha lounges, restaurants, and wineries, because vineyards are amazing in Moldova. Again, down below in the description to this video. And I will leave it at that and say, as what is emblazoned on my t-shirt, Slava Ukraini. The response, if you don't know, is Heroim Slava. This actually means glory to Ukraine. The response is glory to the heroes. And I will say do pobachna, which is goodbye in Ukrainian, and do peremohi, which is to victory.